The Energy of Abundance, Practical Advice and Spiritual Wisdom to Achieve Anything You Want in Life by Phyllis King. Chapter 12, Surrender. Eckhart Tolle says, surrender to what is. Say yes to life and see how life suddenly starts working for you rather than against you. There's a process, an art, and a discipline to mastering surrender. Surrender, as we know it, implies we have to give something over to someone else or that we relinquish control or power in some way. Surrender in this context is much more aligned with relinquishing control. So this is a great place to begin the dialogue about what surrender is. First, control, it's an illusion. We can't control anything. The ego can become skilled at navigating the life experience, but at any given time, in an instant, our lives can be changed by something we cannot control. Edna's story relates to this point perfectly. Edna is a wonderful, caring, and dedicated mother. Edna was in her kitchen one year preparing Thanksgiving dinner for her 2 young adult sons. This was something she did every year. It was a family tradition. She was the matriarch in the family and did a beautiful job preparing a meal the family would enjoy, making the environment warm, cozy, and inviting. It was a consistent event that she controlled and managed every year, and it went off without a hitch. Well, one year, during the preparation of the meal, the phone rang. Within the time it took her to pick up the phone, she went from having 2 sons to having 1 son. Her life was forever changed. Thanksgiving would be forever changed. She had absolutely no control over that outcome. The more we remind ourselves that nothing is promised and that each moment is a gift, the less inclined we will be to control what is. And that is really the crux of the matter. All suffering is created by our resistance to what is. And when we practice the art of surrender or no resistance, we remain in the flow of abundance. When we resist the present moment, we reject abundance. The ability to surrender isn't necessarily easy to do. We have to take easy out of our vocabulary and simply look for what works to help us shift. Surrender takes practice and determination, and we often are addicted to our emotional body. We've become so hyper-focused on my feelings, my feelings, my feelings, that it takes us out of balance to the total view of our experience. And so we do tend to default to the emotional realm first and foremost. But once we get that in place, we can work our way up to and through surrender. And as we practice it more and more, we get there more quickly when we need to. So how do we know when we need to surrender? What does that look like? First, we're uncomfortable. We're mad, scared, frustrated, sad, or angry. Some situation, person, or event has stimulated a potent emotional reaction inside of us. Next, we're looking for something or someone outside of us to make it better. We see this a lot when people have money troubles. If only so-and-so would give me that thing for free, or give me a loan, or pay for me, I'd feel better. These ideas that someone else controls our well-being are band-aids to the ultimate question we all have to face. How do I make myself happy? Next, how do we know we need to surrender? We're sick and tired. Sometimes being sick and tired of our reality is one of the best things that can happen to us. By the time we get there, we're tired. We don't have a lot of energy to struggle against what is. And so our only option is to stop resisting and go with the flow. So now, how do we surrender? What does that look like? Well, become aware you're resisting. When we become aware that we're on a loop, that we're worrying and stressing and freaking out, we give ourselves an opportunity to stop it. Next, stop the loop. Get off the hamster wheel. Take a moment to do that. So the following method has worked for me in the past to get off the hamster wheel. From the awareness that I'm in on a loop, I will look at the palm of my hand. This is a true story. I take the palm of my hand and gently smack myself in the forehead. Yes, I mean that. It's a physical alert that is very effective to get my attention and then begin to shift focus. When I smack myself in the forehead, I make a statement physically and intentionally to myself that I'm in a loop and I need to get out of the loop. And you can use whatever works for you. It could be a rubber band snapping against your wrist, or doing jumping jacks, or combing your hair. But it's really helpful to include a small physical activity to mark the moment and gain your intentional attention. The activity just has to be definitive, something you can remember and do ongoingly. So this is the tool to begin to call the loop to an end. And in this moment, you recognize you're on a loop and you are now going to begin a process to get out of the loop. So you've got your attention. Now have a discussion with yourself and your fears. There was a time I worried about money just relentlessly. It was torturous. I worried about other things too, but money was the big thing. It was stealing my life force and controlling me on so many levels. Yet I was still consenting to worrying about it as a valid reaction to my life. And that's when I began the smack of the head to the forehead technique to stop my worry loop. And then I began to talk to myself. And the discussion would look something like this. All right, universe, you want me to miss my rent payment? You want me to lose my car? But then I would go, okay, I know I can't be given a learning experience I don't need. So there must be something here for me that I'm not seeing. Perhaps I'll see it later, but I am not going to give up my good feelings for one more second. Universe, do your worst. I am not going to that dark place. I'm not going to feel crappy one more minute. I would battle it out inside my head until I finally consented to my what is reality. Sometimes it took me 10 minutes, sometimes it took me 45 minutes, but I stayed with it until I stayed with the higher narrative. And the most amazing thing started to happen when I began to practice this technique. Every single time, not 98% of the time, not 99% of the time, 100% of the time. Every time I did this process, within 24 to 48 hours, whatever my concern had been resolved benevolently. The positive outcome trained me and helped me eradicate my addiction to worry. And if I was concerned about money, a check would show up that I hadn't anticipated. Something always came that I hadn't known about. And I said to myself, I'm so glad I didn't spend the last 48 hours worrying and stressed out. Next, find your outlet for processing emotion. Each situation shows up a little differently. If you're invested in a relationship emotionally or something severe occurs, it can take some practice and creativity to work through your emotional attachment and find surrender. For me, writing is how I process everything in my life. I write letters, some I never send. I write a lot of articles. When I'm having difficulty in a relationship, I always write letters. Again, I don't always send them, but as I have a dialogue from my perspective, it helps me sort what I'm attached to and what's really coming up for me. In the past, I was a professional singer and used music to express myself. And I love music because even though there are lyrics and songs, the music itself and the process of generating sound with your body or fingers causes us to release energy in a wonderful way, and often without language. And so we can access the unconscious mind without language and simply move energy. So the point here is that all release does not have to be conscious. There are methods to release that are just as potent, that don't involve conscious engagement. I found singing and playing to be hugely healing. I didn't always know that I was healing, but it felt good. And that's kind of the whole purpose of healing, to feel better. Now, when I exercise, it's another great way I process through my feelings. When my heart rate is up and the endorphins kick in, it's some of the most productive solving and feeling time I have. Often, if I start out on my elliptical machine, I'll close my eyes. I mean, I really go inside when my body starts moving. It's another way I release. There's no one way or right way for any person. Mostly, it's just helpful to have a way to go into our process and release energy and learn what works for us. And if we can identify that, we can use that to get to surrender. If I'm pent up or upset about something, I'm probably going to write about it. Then I'll go get some form of exercise. Those happen to be things that are good for me and work for me. There's no mistake there. And I encourage everyone to look at those things that already give them pleasure. And likely there's a way to garner an energy release through that activity. And finally, look at what's in it for you and be thankful. When I say in it, we have to mine the gold from our experiences. We have to move away from what we perceive that is negative is happening and look at how we can expand ourselves, how we can become better, grow, or learn from the moment we are in. You have to be an investigator in your own life. And rather than going to the negative polarity and ask from a disempowered view, why is this happening to me? As if you're being punished. Turn it over and say, what am I feeling? Have I felt this before? When did I feel this in the past? How much of this is present time? How much is past time? How old do I feel? Is this actually true? And when we slow down enough to look at our situation through these lenses, most of us will identify very quickly the source of the wounding or the energy that's taking our attention into the negative and why we're being triggered. And once we see the connection in our life, it becomes easier to expand and shift into a new perspective. We recognize it's not just what's happening in the moment that's causing our discomfort. Next, learn to tolerate discomfort. Whenever we change, even when it's positive, it can be uncomfortable. Human beings are creatures of habit, and depending upon the study, most experts agree that 90 to 94% of all of our choices and interactions are conscious, unconscious, and habitual. A few years ago, I moved from one house to another in the same town. And for several months, if I didn't really pay attention, I automatically started to drive down the old street to my former house. I'd have to backtrack. And this is a simple example of how we create habit and structure to feel safe and secure. And when we go out of our comfort zone, even if it's good, we are in uncharted territory. And our brain says to us, my survival's in question, resist, this may not be safe. And this is part of what makes change so difficult. And without awareness, support, and determination, we're hardwired not to change. So as we point ourselves in the direction of expansion, we have to become skilled with managing discomfort and stay present with it. One of my mentors, Nayaswami Asha, used to tell us a story about her yogi and how he would go in for dental work without anesthetic. Can you imagine? His rationale was that he wanted the discipline and the practice of putting his attention elsewhere. I think I'll skip that one, but his response was, life is short, so what if I have a little pain? That is a very enlightened perspective from someone with an expanded consciousness and skilled in the art of identification with the eternal now. For those of us who are still inching along at the pace most people vibrate at on this planet, we have to make room for discomfort at the level we can. I like to think of it more like when we work out at the gym, if we haven't been. Those first few weeks, if you haven't been working out, you're going to be sore. It's going to be hard, and you have to tolerate discomfort. Well, in spiritual expansion, emotional expansion, we have to learn to tolerate some measure of discomfort along the way as well. It's part of the process. When we feel sadness or resistance to a breakup, a job loss, loss of a pregnancy, or anything that really pulls our heartstrings, we have to let ourselves experience it and do what we can not to rush off of the feelings until we understand the totality of this perspective they serve. And it takes courage and it takes determination. But these are traits you want to build into yourself if you want to be a maximum receiver of abundance. Be patient and compassionate with yourself. When we're experiencing emotions on the negative polarity, it's rough. I've been there. We want to remember that there are no deadlines or benchmarks we're supposed to meet. We're in a process trying to balance and expand our awareness. It's a continuum. And what matters most is how we feel about ourselves. Yes, we may be in the middle of a crisis or a loss or a big change, but we have to learn to be patient, forgiving, and compassionate with ourselves. Too often, our achievement-based perspectives start criticizing and telling us we're failing, that we need to be doing something different or feeling something different than what we are. And yes, we want to elevate ourselves, but we can't skip over steps in the process. I wrote an article recently talking about you plant an apple seed in the ground, that seed's always going to become an apple tree someday, but it has to go through its phases. And we do too. And we have to balance our progress and our progression with equal amounts of being able to tolerate discomfort, but also being able to be unconditional with ourselves. I have to tell clients who are punishing themselves to substitute a friend in place of the circumstance or event they're inside of. And I ask them if they would have the same judgmental perspective with their friend as they do about themselves. Most of the time, they say absolutely not. So why should there be a double standard? Last week I spoke to a client, Vanessa, who told me she was very mad at herself. And she started by saying, "Bear with me, I might cry." And she went on to tell me she was supposed to pick up her grown daughter who was renting a car. And the car rental agency was right next to a hospital that they were both familiar with. It was 5 minutes from Vanessa's home. Vanessa left the house and immediately started driving toward a medical facility she often frequented. It was on the other side of town. And as she started driving down the road, about 10 minutes into the trip, she realized she was going to the wrong place. She had to turn around, backtrack, and make her way to the true destination. Meanwhile, her daughter became quite worried since Vanessa didn't carry a cell phone, and she did arrive 30 minutes late. Vanessa was so upset that she made that mistake. She thought it reflected that perhaps she was senile or no longer competent. And it was a reasonable mistake. Vanessa is sharp as a tack. And as I spoke with her, I had to convince her to not be so hard on herself. And I got about 50% of the way with her, but she was conditioned to take herself to task, that we mistakenly substitute that as being productive in our process. But learning to love ourselves through our missteps and flaws, oh my goodness, that's where the gold is. That's where you really elevate your energy. The more we can comfort ourselves, love ourselves, and give ourselves to this expansive plight of our soul, the easier time we'll have with all of it, and the easier it is to realize abundance. Surrender can be instantaneous, or it can take 10 years. Hopefully, you're on the lesser side of that. There's no right or wrong about it. And the steps I outlined help. I have another client named Trisha, who's a very gifted psychic, and she has triplets, and they were a surprise. And as you can imagine, having triplets is a lot of work. It's beyond exhausting. But she was a technical whiz as well. And she had to put her career on hold to parent these babies. And childcare for three is an enormous expense. So she had a lot of frustration with that. She also had challenges with division of labor with her husband. And as she tried to continue her spiritual development, she got to a point where she was so overwhelmed by life that she decided to back away completely and deny her spiritual truth. So there are all kinds of scenarios and extremes that play out in life. Perhaps Trisha just needed a break, and shutting down was a way to get a break. I think people with dementia and Alzheimer's are also people looking for a break. They just don't want to participate anymore. This is opinion, by the way. I'm not saying it's a fact. But I know that we're on a continuum of expansion always. And if we choose to slow down or speed up, so be it. It's what we need, or what we wouldn't be allowed to do it. One would say Trisha surrendered to her physical reality, but she obviously needed to do that. In the process of surrender, we have to intentionally welcome it into our life. There's no right pace or rhythm. The natural course of expansion includes contraction. Mostly we want to get skilled at honoring it. If we can accomplish that, it will take us a long way in our process. It's mainly resistance and criticism that really sabotage our efforts. Those frequencies are so contracted, not much can get in or out while we're in those states of being. So what follows is a brief meditative and affirmative statement you can reflect upon when you find yourself in a contracted space. I trust that I am supported in all ways at all times in this experience and in my life. Perfect solutions, gentle resolutions, and benevolence flows in and through me now and always. I receive them with gratitude and appreciation. I open my heart to receive the loving guidance of divine consciousness that is ever present in the universe. I think and act kindly to myself and others. Life is unfolding perfectly for me. I own this awareness completely and forever with love and certainty, and so it is.